Welcome everyone. This is the second Sisters in Crime New South Wales chapter event. We did exist in the past and then we sort of died out. Now we're coming back bigger and better than ever. My name is Catherine Dupelou-Ménager and I'm the convener. Now out there in the ether are some of the other members of the committee. Natalie Conyer, Louisa Larkin, Anne Penn-Hallerick, Kimberly Alsop, and they're all welcoming you too, although they're not all on the screen. I'll begin though by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, because of course the great thing is people can be watching us from anywhere in Australia. We recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And now I'd like to let you know briefly how I'll be running this evening. Your audio and video have been muted, not Kate and Sarah's, obviously. They'll speak for about 45 minutes. Hold on to your questions until Sarah says, right, start to send them in, about 10, 15 minutes from the end. And Sarah will then ask as many questions as she has time for. Now, I'm assuming that you've joined us because, like us, you revel in good crime writing by great women. And today we've got exactly that for you. So one writer asking questions and one writer answering questions. Kate Mildenhall is a creative writing teacher as well as a writer, and she's done a bit of genre crossing with her wonderful second novel. So Skylarking, her first novel, was about friendship, about loss, about love. And I mean, The Mother Fault is about those things as well, but I suppose you could describe it as a dystopic thriller, a truly original and gripping book. Now, this is my review copy. That copy of the book looks different, but that's the new one that Kate's holding up. But 20 lucky people will be getting my version. So very, very, special thing. You keep it on your shelf. And if you aren't one of the 20 people who wins it, I'm afraid you're going to have to wait for a couple of weeks. That's right, isn't it, Kate, to get your own copy. Sarah Bailey, who will be interviewing Kate, runs an advertising agency during the day. Quite how she runs her life, we've been wondering, especially as you're both in lockdown in Melbourne. But Sarah burst onto the scene in 2017 with The Dark Lake, which won the Ned Kelly Awards for Best First Fiction in 2018, having just won the Davitt Award. So that is a real bursting onto the scene. And she's now got 3 Gemma Woods books under her belt. She's in the process of writing another book, so we can look forward to that next year. Now, I think writers ask other writers really good questions, so let's get on with it. I'll come back at the end to say thank you, but over to you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Catherine and Kate. I feel really lucky actually to have been invited to ask you questions about your amazing new book, The Mother Fault, which I've got a copy of right here. I'll hold it up occasionally just to remind everybody that go out and buy it. But I genuinely think it's one of the most original books that I've read, well, probably ever really. And I think the best thing about it for me was that I didn't know a huge amount about it when I read it. So I don't want to kind of have any spoilers tonight because I want everyone who buys it to have the same experience that I did. So we'll talk a lot about it, but we'll talk about it in a way that's kind of cryptic enough that people will still want to know what happens and go out and read it themselves. But I wanted to kick off with a question that I thought was quite topical, which is to ask you whether or not you downloaded the government's COVID Safe app.
I did not. And it was really problematic. And even a couple of people kind of sent me messages about it because, of course, in The Mother Fault, which I wrote, over 4 years and was absolutely done before this pandemic hit us, it's all about surveillance. And in fact, the whole idea that the department puts out this theory that we are all in this together, and those words are in the book, and it was just completely and utterly spooky. But I think someone had a go at me on Twitter at one stage when I said that I wasn't downloading it. And I think, in the front of the book, I don't know if it's in your copy, but one of the epigraphs is from the documentary The Great Hack on Netflix, and it says, we failed to read the terms and conditions. And I suppose what I hope what I'm trying to explore in the novel is making sure we know what we're signing up for.
Yeah, and I mean, I was being cheeky asking you that question. It's what happened to me reading the book was that there was a few moments where I was like, how did she sort of predict this? How did she kind of, assume that this would be some of the issues that we would be tackling? And I think something that's really interesting in literature, I mean, I've only just recently read Station 11 as well, which was, I think, 2014.
Amazing book.
Amazing book, but, so is yours. And I think they're both in that category of depicting a future world that maybe isn't as far in the future as we thought it was. And it's funny how things like that can kind of end up in the zeitgeist. It sort of seems like people are stitching themes and concerns together and creating literature as kind of a way to explore that, which I just found fascinating. So, I mean, do you think that the idea from this book came because you did have a deep-seated concern about some of the trends and, I guess a cynical point of view about where we're headed as a society? How did it kind of all come about?
Yeah, I think so. What I began with 4 years ago was this idea of what I would do if I was in the position of some of the many asylum seekers that we were watching who were trying to make it into Australia and countries all over the world, and who were in our country being turned back, as they still are, or put in detention. And I was, that was the thing that was really making me despair and furious. But also, I've got two relatively young kids. They were younger then. And I was also in that position, as we often are as parents and carers, of being daily kind of frustrated by my kids, Sarah, as you would well know, but recognizing too that I would, do anything that I had to or needed to keep them safe. So that was where it began. But as I started looking at ideas of borders and how people move and statelessness and what it means to be safe, and whether that is about being connected to a place or to people or to a way of life, I suppose, that's when I started to look at different governments, at surveillance. And, I kind of tried to take that idea of that I know Atwood has talked about in The Handmaid's Tale, which is that everything in there had already happened. There was a precedence for all of those kinds of, ideas that she had in the book. And I tried to stick to that. I tried to stick to that idea of disappearances being used as a weapon by government, surveillance being used as a weapon, all that kind of stuff was what I was trying to do. And ideas that still are really problematic and that I don't have any answers for either.
Well, I think, mentioning Atwood, that's something that's quite interesting, because obviously when you read books like yours, you do start to kind of go, what are adjacent books? So Station 11, especially for me, having read it so recently, was really relevant. Handmaid's Tale as well. But I think the thing that's really interesting is that there's nothing magical or fantastical in any of those stories. I mean, they are all grounded in the real world, the human world, things that could happen, things that have happened. And your book's very similar. Like, there's some really confronting scenes where you sort of do feel incredibly out of your comfort zone. But then when you think through it, there's every possibility that could happen. Like, you're not delving into a world that starts to become really far-fetched, especially when you think about what's happening now. And
I know.
12 months ago, the thought of going down to get a coffee and everyone's wearing a mask was pretty unlikely.
Exactly.
Just every single day reality now. So did you feel like you were writing it that you were ever pushing it too far, or did you always kind of have to check that?
That's such a good question, because the logistics of this novel nearly killed me, because all of the time I was like, I need to trust in this world that I'm building, and I need the reader to trust in it too. And I wanted it to feel like it could happen tomorrow, so I kind of had this idea of, I kind of did a parallel kind of timeline, which was, okay, if things had all kind of gone to shit 10 years ago, where would we be in another 10? And that's how I kind of planned it. And I did, one day I remember one day when you could still get on trains, very early on when I was writing, and I'd forgotten my Mikey card and I'd forgotten my credit card. Like, for some reason, I had everything in different bags and I was really stuck, and my phone didn't do all the things that it should do. And it was like such a privileged, not very unsafe, not dangerous at all position. But I was like, oh, like, what am I going to do? Am I going to walk somewhere or call someone to come and pick me up? This is ridiculous that I'm stuck in this position. And so all those kinds of little ideas made me think, okay, well, what do you do when you don't have any access to cash? Your cash runs out. What do you do? I did so many Google searches about how to disappear, and fell down that rabbit hole, because people do disappear, and people, especially women, have to disappear sometimes as well. And so they were all the things that I really tried to follow the train of logic to make sure that I got them right. Yeah.
And in your mind, when is the book set? Like, do you have like a moment in time that because I noticed with Mim, who's the main character in the book, who we'll talk about in a minute, but she talks a bit about her teenage years, and I'm 38, I think. And so in my mind, her teenage years kind of aligned relatively well with mine.
Yeah.
So I felt like it was sort of present day, but obviously a slightly different version of present day than where it's now. Is that kind of around right?
That's exactly what I did. And, I wanted it to be kind of 20 years, but I also wanted her experiences, Mim's experiences. I wanted to be able to draw on my own life for those as well. So it was important to me that I didn't fully push it 20 years into the future. So the kind of events, the terror attacks, for want of a better word, that happen in the book are meant to have occurred, kind of 10 years ago now. So, and that's precipitated this change in government, and the new legislation, which hilariously or scarily now, I don't know how to think about it. I keep thinking I could have just had a pandemic. I mean, I could have just brought in a quick pandemic and fixed it all like that. And I do talk about viruses a little bit in there, but it's what has stunned me is how quickly it's changed. And I think, I don't know if you've experienced this, and maybe people in the audience as well, that during COVID and what we've experienced through there's been this moment, and I've talked to some of my friends about it too, where I think, is this the moment that we're meant to panic? Like, is this it? Or is this, oh my gosh, like I thought I should be panicking a week ago. Now am I panicking? And that's what I wanted. That position is the position I wanted Mim to be in too, because I think, I am a rule follower. I am good. I tend to do what I'm told, but I wanted to, and Mim is like that too, but I wanted to push this idea of, well, when do you stop that? When do you say, okay, I can't do this anymore?
Yeah, there's a lot in all of those answers. Like, I think one thing that I feel is really important in dystopian fiction is that it's the transition between the two worlds that is the saddest, and where you get that real emotional payoff. So I think the fact that she could remember a past and a childhood that was so familiar to me meant that what she was experiencing now felt so treacherous and sort of threatening, because it felt like, well, if she can go through that transition and this can be her new reality, then that's sort of feasible.
Yeah.
Which is what I think works so well in like The Handmaid's Tale too. The flashbacks are heartbreaking because it wasn't that long ago, but look how different it is. So, I wonder if we're now going to be looking down a barrel of dystopian fiction for, say, people that are born in this era who actually just write from that moment and they don't have a huge amount of memory of the past. Like, I think that will be an interesting thing to kind of track. I want to talk quickly about the setting. So obviously it's set in Australia, in a different kind of Australia, and a huge amount of the book takes place on a boat. And I feel like this is also a little bit in the zeitgeist at the moment, because I've just read Sophie Hardcastle's book Below Deck, which is predominantly set on a boat and very sailing oriented. And I know that there's a book around at the moment that's also, The Girl in the Mirror also has a huge boating, sailing theme, and that's a big sort of book at the moment as well. So where did your sailing, boating setting come from, and what kind of like research and what did that represent symbolically in the book for you as well?
Okay, so I knew right at the beginning that I wanted Mim to flee Australia by boat, and at the start I had all very big grand ideas about writing an allegory and all the rest of it on seeking asylum, and it didn't end up being that book at all, but I knew that I wanted her to get on a boat. Now the problem was I have very limited boating experience. So a dear friend, an old friend, Lee, took me out on his boat just in the bay with the kids, and that was great for kind of getting an understanding of the layout, but also because I was terrified that the kids would go overboard the entire time. And I knew that that was a feeling I needed to explore. But I also knew that I really wanted to be on a bit more of the open ocean. And I knew that I needed to be more scared of the ocean than I am. I'm a beachgoer and, you know, a swimmer, and I spend half my life as much as I can at the beach and in the ocean, but I'm not as scared of it as I should be, partly because I don't go beyond the breakers. So what I did, Googling one night when I was kind of working out, I had big maps everywhere how she was going to leave Australia and where she would be going. And I found, just because I was Googling Darwin to Indonesia, you know, Darwin to wherever, I found a yacht race, the Darwin to Ambon Yacht Rally. And I kind of looked into it a bit more, and they were looking for crew members. And so I knew from some sailing mates who I'd been talking to, like, how will I get experience? They were like, everyone wants to get on a boat all the time. But I just sent off this little email saying, I am completely inexperienced, but I'm really enthusiastic, and I'm writing a book about sailing, and can I come? And then I just thought, you know, I won't hear from these guys again. And then about a month out, I got a phone call from Neville from Darwin, who was a captain who was looking for another female crew member because he needed a female crew member to hot bunk with his other female crew member. So that's 6 blokes and there was 2 of us. And so I got a gig. And so I flew up to Darwin, and my husband, Adam, said, you know, if you get there and you think it's weird, just get on a flight back home. But I didn't. I got on the boat and we sailed off to Ambon, a little island in Indonesia. It took us about 4 or 5 days. And then I had another 2 days there. And then I flew home. That's the moment I did think I was going to die on the boat. But the moment I really thought I was going to die was when I flew back from Ambon to Darwin on this special chartered flight that they called the Flying Cigar. And literally the blow up boat was under my seat. So it wasn't like a life jacket. It was like the whole safety thing was under my seat. So that's what I did to be on the boat. And I took notes the whole time. And it was just the most extraordinary experience because I could feel it and understand it. And plus the sailors, the incredible blokes, and Joy, the other woman on the boat, told so many stories. And I just felt like I understood then the language of what it was to be on the ocean like that.
Oh, that's amazing. And I think you've done a very good job. I don't know much about sailing or boating, but it felt very real to me. And I really loved as well, I think, the juxtaposition between the intense surveillance that she was experiencing in Australia and all that was going on. And then suddenly being in this environment that was so isolated and made her so like irrelevant and sort of nothing. And I just thought that contrast was really kind of humbling and a bit scary as well. So it was sort of the 2 extremes. But I also thought that the notion of resourcefulness was really interesting across your entire book. So, and, you know, I guess, like I said, we'll talk about Mim in a minute, but she really steps up in the book, I think it's safe to say, from the first page. And that boating environment, I think, it's prime for anybody that needs to really challenge themselves, because that notion of being resourceful is really intensified on the ocean and on a boat, especially if you're sort of a novice. So it sort of felt to me like those 2 extremes were just so well done and really interesting. And then when she obviously lands at the destination, it's again that complete contrast. So it sort of really broke the book into different acts, which I thought was really nice as well. So amazing experience for you. And I also talk a bit, so the book again, The Mother Fault, like I think, talk us through the name and the title and what it means to you, because I saw a little thing that you posted on Twitter the other day about the titles that you've been playing around with, and like the moment where you kind of wrote down The Mother Fault. And I mean, I love those moments. I'm actually terrible at coming up with titles for my book, and the only one that seems like it's going to see the light of day is this current one I'm working on. But it's pretty exciting if you actually get to name your own book. So walk us
so exciting
what it means for you.
So I actually, that when you say that, I posted that thing on Twitter the other day, and I only just found it again. And, you know, like there's so much about the writing process which remains completely elusive even to the writer, I think. And I kept a journal this time of the entire process, partly because when I got out to do this kind of stuff with my first book, Skylarking, I was so cross with myself that I couldn't remember how things happened and how I got to things. So I deliberately kept a journal this time. It's like 160,000 words. It's this ridiculous, unwieldy document. But to the title, I was playing with these ideas of geology and geological thinking and strata, and there's a lot of that. Mim's background is in geology, as is her husband Ben's. The book for a really long time was called Borderless, and I think that move to the mother fault was also when I let go of what I thought the book was going to be, because it really morphed over the 4 years, and I really owned that. I owned that it was Mim's story. I had always known that it was Mim's story, but I really owned that she was driving it, and she had driven it in a kind of a different direction to what I thought it would be. And also just the play on, there's so many fantastic words in geology, and I did so much reading. I've got one of the books here that I read, you know, which is incredible, is John McPhee's book, Annals of the Former World. And I got addicted to the kind of words. I went to a couple of uni lectures as well, first year geology lectures, just the vocab of it. And so all these words I kept writing down, cleavage and fault and schism and all those kinds of things. And then that play with fault, and even now sometimes when I'm Googling like to find a picture of my book, and you put in the mother fault, the kinds of things that come up are news stories about women who have accidentally left their kids alone, whose kids have got sick. You know, we think it's our fault so much as mothers. We think we've stuffed up our kids, we've done everything wrong, but there's also that play on it that we can do that to a fault as well, which I wanted to play with. So it just seemed like such a perfect name, and it gave me real clarity on what the book was, which is I couldn't ask for anything more. And then the publishers loved it, so that was great.
Yeah, it does. It feels like the perfect title. I think it's one of those titles that works when you're going into the book and, you know, you read the blurb and you kind of go, oh, that makes sense. And then you finish it and kind of go, perfect bookend. It really works on all different kinds of levels.
I'm so glad you say that. That end, Sarah, nearly killed me. But
I can imagine. So let's talk a little bit about Mim, because she is definitely the beating heart of the book and drives the narrative, but also I think just drives the kind of emotional journey that the reader goes on as well. What kind of relationship do you have with her?
Oh, you know, I just today was thinking, how the hell am I going to let her go when this part is done? Because, you know, I'm working on something new now, but of course there's always that feeling like that she's there with you when you're talking about the book. She frustrated me a lot. You talked before about her resourcefulness, and I really wanted to get that part in, which I think I experienced at times, and I know a lot of other women I've spoken to, particularly mums with young kids, that feeling of suddenly not knowing if you're capable of doing things. I think it happens if you've taken time off with kids and you return to work and suddenly kind of work's moved ahead and work is a bit different and you're not sure where you fit anymore. And I also recall feeling, I had cesareans for both my kids, and that when my husband returned to work, just thinking like, you can't leave. Like, how will I do anything? And it's a terrifying feeling, but I think it's one that can really persist. So that I love that you said that you really read that in Mim, that she develops that strength. I think that she, in the end, kind of shocks herself even with what she's capable of doing. And the other thing that was really interesting to me was how, I don't know if you do this, but I'm the kind of person who used to, as a kid, tear out the start of journals because I didn't want to be embarrassed by what I wrote before. I don't do it anymore. But so I think that sometimes in life we completely shuck off previous versions of ourselves and think, okay, well, this is the new me. And I think the problem with that for many women when they embark on motherhood is that it's such a difficult thing to identify with wholly because it changes your life. It's such a rupture. And it's such an incredible one, but it also brings with it a lot of challenges. And so I wanted to explore this idea of a woman who realizes that all these separate parts of herself are actually what she needs to be whole and be herself. And that was playing with that idea of an old flame in the character of Nick as well that I wanted to get in.
Well, I think, yeah, it's an excellent segue into the men in the book, which kind of play a secondary layer, I suppose, compared to, I think, the Mim, the mother, and then also the children. But Ben and Nick, for me, they definitely represent sort of different parts of Mim. And then I think she sort of then almost struggles with that in a really binary way. It kind of, the pendulum swings back and forth in that second half of the book, and it becomes sort of a different kind of cliffhanger, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the story question that drives this whole book is will Mim find her husband Ben? That's who she's looking for. That's who she needs to find for all kinds of resolution. But she's also really frustrated with him at the start of the book. Like when the book opens, she's annoyed. He's got to keep his career. He jets off. He's told her that, the pendulum will swing back and it'll be her turn next to work. But that doesn't really happen. She's lost a sense of herself. She doesn't feel like she's desired anymore. All of those kinds of things, which are really normal that happen. Plus she feels like she needs him to cope. She's had an experience which is never really plainly stated, but with kind of postnatal anxiety, and she feels like she needs him to cope. But when Nick, who is an old boyfriend from when she was really young, comes back, she's reminded of that other person. It's like remembering the old self as well. And I needed them to be different. I am, I worry as I start writing my third book now that I will be addicted to writing love triangles for all of my life, because there's one in Skylarking as well. But I think I love that tension and the way that it represents the different parts of ourself. So, I can remember saying to editors, and even, there was a recent discussion kind of on film adaptations, and this idea that, the men probably have to have a bit more to do because if you want to get stars for those roles, but they were never that important to me. Mim is the key character driving it, and they represent different things. They also represent that both Ben and Nick are so wedded to their ideas of who they should be and what it is to be good and what it is to live a life, and they are very inflexible in those ideas. So to watch Mim kind of navigate those, it was really interesting to me as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think similarly with the children, because children often play a really backseat role in fiction, they're either, I think, an inconvenience or an excuse, I tend to find. And I think it was interesting that you made them a little bit older. So they, by default, had to have a little bit more of a personality and a point of view. But I felt like they were also representing different parts of Mim, particularly her daughter, who she was, quite often frustrated with. And I think how honest to be with kids of that age when, you're embarking on the kind of situation that Mim was having to drag them into. That trust and that slow reveal of information, and also the honesty, like what she was going through as a person, not just as a mother or a caregiver, I thought was done amazingly well, but also made me really sit there and think, gosh, what responsibility do you have as a parent to tell your kids kind of what is actually really going on when you can easily hide it? She didn't have to tell them anything, but she could have told them everything. So that decision kind of being constantly having to be made at every juncture was pretty nerve-wracking too.
Yeah, and it's so hard. There's so many things that you picked up on there. One, that children, you know, I made the children older also because my children grew as I was writing it, and they said some really interesting stuff, which I always kind of riffed on a little bit. Also, children who are there constantly, which they are because Mim has the sole responsibility for them, are on a technical level really hard to write in because they are always there, or you're having to put them in another place so that you can get those secrets out. I think I'm as guilty as any other person, and particularly at the moment during COVID, of doing a lot of placating to the kids, like it's okay, it's okay, it's going to be okay. You know, that's just a litany that I think parents are really used to saying. But I was also keenly aware of that incredible Maurice Sendak quote, which I won't get right, but which is basically like, the children always know. You know, the kids always know what's going on. They may not know the details of what's going on, but they know something is going on. And so respecting that as well. My first reader, actually, Penny Russin, who's an incredible friend and writer, when she finished reading an early version of the book, she said, "This is a love story between Mim and Essie. You know, have you realized that?" And it was one of those wonderful moments that gives you clarity as well, when I realized that, yes, that is what it was about. Coming to terms with what that mother-daughter relationship is, and a daughter who is growing and becoming older and needing more information from the world. So that was a special one to write too. Yeah,
I think the Mim-Essie relationship is definitely the strongest bond in the book, and also the one most at risk in a way. So yeah. I think it brings up a lot of legacy kind of questions for Mim as well, about what imprint she's kind of planting on her daughter. And I know that most people probably haven't read the book in this session, but that scene with Heidi near the start of the book, all I can say is, yeah. I found that pretty confronting. That's kind of when I went, right, this is that kind of book. Okay. So,
you know, I have to mention, Sarah, and I won't talk any more about the scene, but that scene, when people get to it, came out in one hit, and it was just one of those magic writing days. And I was very, very lucky during the writing of this book to do a mentorship with Charlotte Wood, and I'd had a session with her, and she just said something along the lines of, "You've got to stop playing it safe. You've got to stop playing it safe." And so I wrote that scene in one hit, and yeah, readers often comment on it, or early readers have commented on it. So that's great that you did.
It felt like you wrote it really hot, which is like that thought of it just being a real fiery download, but it definitely comes out that way. So good. It's very impressive. And I guess I kind of wanted to make a comment on the writing overall, because it felt really, it's so neat. Like, it's really neat and intentional and quite sparse. But I feel like it played so well into the whole theme of the book, and that sort of feeling of being watched and being really, I guess, having to be really kind of cut glass with all the prose, and nothing was flowery. And as someone that annoyingly writes really flowery, even though I'm not a very flowery person, so it's a real frustration of mine, I felt like that minimal filter that you put everything through, that's certainly how it reads in the final version. Is that the way you write, or does that
no process? It's not the way I write generally. And you know, I did really want The Mother Fault to be a departure, or I wanted my second book to be a departure from my first. And I suppose you could describe my first as quite flowery. One of the things was that I was so terrified about doing plot. And I've talked to you about this before, Sarah, when I've interviewed you, that, you know, I was really looking to crime writers, to thriller writers, you know, to try and work out, how do I get those beats of plot? So a lot of what I wrote it as placeholder text. Like I said to myself, I'm just going to write this bare bones and I'll come back and I'll fix it. And then stylistically, that started to be the way that I wrote. The other thing that happened, I did do, you know, so many drafts of this, but one of the things that Charlotte recommended midway through, when I was kind of a bit stuck, she said, retype it, you know, and I was like, are you serious? What, every word, like actually physically retype it? And she said, yeah, just like put it beside you, print it out, and then retype the thing into a blank document. And luckily I was on a retreat. I had a couple of days away from the family to do that. And she said, what will happen is that you will realize that if there is any word that you can't be bothered retyping, it doesn't belong. And that was an incredible process for that as well. Plus I've had incredible editors working with me as well, so it's really got it down, and I've loved that. It's so muscular, and you know, getting down into it, I've really enjoyed the editing process this time too.
That's like crazy hard work, but maybe satisfying kind of crazy hard work. I guess, that everyone talks about being really rewarding. So I know you just said you enjoyed the editing process, but did you enjoy writing the whole book? Because it's obviously a pretty gritty, full-on concept to wrap your head around, and you mentioned that it started in a certain form and probably evolved quite a lot, maybe became slightly less political in its intent and more of an emotional story. But did you enjoy the whole process, or what parts did you?
No. I didn't. I thought that I'd written myself into a corner. I remember really clearly, I think I may even have said it on Twitter, where we sometimes say our most honest things, that I had, the book had outsmarted me. Like that I'd written myself into a corner where I didn't know how to fix it and resolve it. And I think that was a lot of telling myself I didn't know how to write this type of book. Like I said before, I'm a rule follower. I did it with historical fiction. I tried to work out what are the rules of writing a book like this. What I came to realize is that there are no rules, and you've got to just kind of own what the book is. It was a longer time, and I had, without going into details, I lost my publisher who had signed the book, and I went in with a different publisher. So there were certainly times in the middle where I thought this book won't get published. But I think, I just found this in the journal the other day, I wrote a letter to Mim, and I got Mim to write a letter to me back, just a kind of writing exercise. And it was at that point that I realized it didn't matter, which sounds so foolish, because I know, of course, I would have been gutted had this book never seen the light of day in terms of a publishing sense. But there was a point where I realized I have to finish writing the book, because it has been this enormous part of my life, and I've given it everything, and I need to finish writing it. And what becomes after that, you know, is up to the gods. And just luckily, the gods were smiling on me, and I got this, which is great.
Lucky for everybody that the gods were smiling if we get to read the book. So at this point, I'm just going to ask that if anyone does have a question, that they pop it into the Q&A function on the Zoom call. Hopefully you guys can all see that. So if you do have a question, tap it away in there, and then in a minute I will go through and pick a couple out to ask Kate. But I've got a couple of sort of final questions for you. I think everyone's always really interested in understanding what the life of a writer is. I don't know why mine's a complete windfire that no one would want to see. Hopefully yours is a bit more appealing. So how does your writing fit around your world? And you know, do you write lots every day? Do you write in bursts? That kind of stuff.
I'm a total burst or binge writer. So most of The Mother Fault was written I had a couple of amazing retreats, one at Varuna and one at Bundanon, which were both incredible. And, you know, like in a week, I can get kind of 20, 30,000 words down. Like it's that spew of words. So, and I also go on a retreat really regularly with the women in my writers group. So I tended to get it down like that. I'm not necessarily a daily words person, although having said that, for the last 3 weeks, I've done the kind of 6 o'clock in the morning, 1,000 words on my new project. And I've loved that. That's out of necessity because of course I'm in, like you, Sarah, Melbourne lockdown at the moment. My 2 kids are at home doing homeschooling as well. So, you know, it's only been this year really for the first time that I have been a full-time writer, whatever that means or looks like. I teach as well. I teach writing as well, but I've certainly claimed it as full-time writing. And I suppose I try and divvy it up into the actual writing work and then the kind of all that admin, which, you know, your social media and all of the other stuff that goes with it. So I divvy those things up too. I'm blissfully lucky that my other gig, though it's not a paid gig, but the other thing that takes up a lot of my time is the podcast, the First Time podcast, which I co-host with Catherine Collette. And why that is fantastic is because that gives me a reason to read and talk to writers as the other part of my life. And, you know, I'm just putting it out there. If someone can give me a life where I just interview writers and write books, that's it. I will die happy.
I actually had that on my, I was going to give you a podcast, the First Time a plug anyway, and
thank you.
Say that quite obviously you started that for free counselling with other writers.
Totally, right? Totally. And we had to beg people at the start to come on. We still sometimes beg people, but now, you know, publishers send us books all the time. We're turning people away all the time, but I'm so obsessed. Like, you can't see it from here, but I've got an entire shelf about, you know, writers' process kind of books. I love interviews with writers. I just love getting into the nitty-gritty of finding out how they do it. So yeah, that and it's been such an incredible help as well for my own process and craft.
It's always, and I think eternally will be fascinating to me, that a book is originally nothing, and then it's not only a book, but much more than that. It's just this incredible entire world that's created. And I think, I mean, I haven't, you know, been proud a few times in my life, but it's really looking at those books and thinking, I don't think I could write any of them again.
No.
I'm lucky that they're in my past because they're not in my future. It's sort of this.
And you must know, Sarah, more than me. I mean, I've only done it twice, but it's also magical and new every time you begin. Like, oh my gosh, I'm doing it again. Who is this person? Like, that's the buzz. That's the reason. And I know people say it, and it kind of gets old when writers say it's not for the glory and publication, and all those things are nice, but there really is nothing like sitting down and just creating a world. Like, it's the buzz. It's the reason we do it, huh?
Yeah, and I think too, there's not a lot that gets finished, I suppose, in this world and in any world.
Yeah.
Yeah, similar to maybe, you know, building a house or something. It's not often that you can sort of stand back and go, that's done. So there's a definite sort of satisfaction to it, I think. Now, there's a couple of questions, so I will ask them of you. So Karina Kilmore here,
hello, Karina,
and has a book of her own, and she says she can't put your book down. No surprises there. No one is going to be able to put it down. But can she also ask you what was the total time like that you spent writing the novel? So from beginning to end.
So I keep on saying this 4 years because I know that, you know, Skylarking came out in August 2016, and at that stage I had a 1-page document that said, do not open this document until after Skylarking is finished, that had this, these thoughts, like woman leaves Australia with her kids kind of thoughts. And I really probably started writing in the November of that year. It had everything gone to plan, it would have been published in kind of 2 years, I suppose. And I had certainly a draft of the prerequisite number of words at that stage. But my goodness, I am so glad for all the things that got thrown in the way that meant that I have taken this long, because the book really now is what I imagined it could be. And so really it's probably 3 years of writing and drafting in the end, and then, you know, 6, 7, 8 months of editing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, nice. It's a long time to be one character. Like, no wonder you and him are close, I guess.
Yeah.
And then Rosalind Mullins has asked a question as well. So as a writer, she wants to know, do you develop an outline, and how sophisticated is it? Or do you just sit down and write, or some other crazy process?
Oh my gosh, I'm leaving just so I can get this to show you. Show and tell, Rosalind, just because I had it here so I can show you, because I had all this out. This was one version, I don't know if you can see that very well, of my outline when I attempted to do a spreadsheet. And I had that, you can see down the bottom was just like, what is going to happen here? Red was, I've got no idea. But I'm not a plotter necessarily. I tried Scrivener at one stage. We had a fight, me and Scrivener, and that did not work. What I what I did do that I found helpful is I just used the outline function in Word, and that in the end really gave me something. I'm doing it for this new book now, so I can kind of speak to how useful it is. Just gave me something to work between, like some beats to work between. And I did arcs. I mean, I've got like piles and piles of paper there of pictures and arcs and timelines and all kinds of things like that. But certainly I don't do any of that, or normally I wouldn't do any of that till I had kind of 30,000-40,000 words. Maybe I'll get better at it.
It's like you get all of that theory out when you get stuck, as opposed to doing it at the start. So
yeah. I think that there's something to be said for that idea too, of just being constantly excited by it and not sure. And you know, like I laugh about that yellow and red part at the bottom there, because the end really did give me some grief at different times, and I've written about 17 different endings to the book. But you know, there was also a joy in that. Joy, that's the wrong word to use. There was fun, I suppose, in like experimenting and being crazy and like, well, what if this happens, and what if there's an explosion, and what if there's a helicopter, you know, all that kind of stuff, which makes the process more fun. And I think gives you that gives that energy to the writing as well, which means that it's not so tortured.
Do you write in order, or are you quite comfortable jumping around to different parts of the book?
Yeah, I jump around. I used to have a theory, like, for instance, with sexual tension, that you had to hold off from the scene so that as the writer, you kept the sexual tension going. But now I'm like, no, I actually think that can influence the writing in a way that maybe takes the book somewhere you don't mean it to go. So now I'm like, stuff it, I'm just going to write the sex scene, or I'm going to write the violent scene, or I'll just go there, and then I'll work out how they all fit together, rather than having that kind of nervous anticipation in me the whole time. Because I think what I realize now is, as the writer, we need to have more control of that. Like we can use that intense kind of emotion. We have to use that, but also we have to also have that sense of like, I'm moving the characters around, I'm in control of this.
Yeah. And
I don't know if that makes sense.
Patchwork that you then kind of pick up and go, oh, that could go here, and need something
yes.
together, and it kind of all somehow turns into a quilt. So yeah. I
did a lot of it. One where we go on retreat, there's one kind of big studio, and I got it just at the perfectly right time, because I did in fact do that like enormous printout, used the whole floor and moved all the chapters around and kind of worked out where everything went, and that was really useful too.
I think someone once said this to me, and I think this is potentially quite true, is that sometimes when you are in the middle of writing your book and you get a bit stuck, and then you do default to some of that more traditional planning type process, a lot of that's just giving yourself time to actually think about in your subconscious while you're sort of messing with post-it notes and stuff. I wonder if there's truth to that.
Our brain, I absolutely, our subconscious does so much of the work, and I think that's why I will always be a fan of going on retreat, because I think too that being able to kind of fall into bed with the book in your head, and then wake up the next morning, not with like kids jumping on your face and getting ready for school, but just straight back into the book, allows you to take that dream state into it. And so many of your problems get fixed. Walking as well, I mean, is one that I will always go to.
Yeah, everything's solved with a bath and a walk, I think.
Absolutely.
Just a reminder to everybody, if you've got any final burning questions for Kate, just to get them in the Q&A, because we're going to finish up in a minute. But I would just like to also ask you, Kate, you've alluded to a new book a couple of times. Obviously, everyone is mad to understand what it's about, and whether or not you're pivoting madly again or staying in a dystopian kind of vibe. So tell us what you can about it.
I am pivoting madly again. I'm going back to historical fiction, Sarah. It was just mad. And, I'm being relatively coy about it, but I did, in an interview I did the other day, I did describe some of the pictures that I've got up on my wall. So this incredible gift of a studio that my husband built for me, we covered it all in pin board so that I could stick things everywhere. And so I've got pictures. If this gives you a bit of a sense, I've got a 1930s slaughterhouse. I've got young Marlon Brando, and I've got a Catherine the Great, some pictures of her, Great Depression. So yeah, I'm going back into the 30s, which I mean, this time that we're in now is kind of feeding that as well so much. So it's exciting, some crime, mystery, a slaughterhouse. That's where I'm going next.
And I wonder, does going from a sort of futuristic world where you get to make stuff up, is that really freeing compared to having to go back and kind of be more true to what happened?
No, it was terrifying. I really found, I don't know if my facial expression just showed you how I felt about that, but the idea that I could just make it up, because Skylarking was based on a true story. So I just had, I didn't know how hard it was to write a novel because I'd never done it before. And I just followed the bones of the true story. Just being able to make it up nearly blew my mind for the Mother Fault. So I'm actually really liking my backgrounds as a teacher. I've worked at the State Library for many years and I've got a history background as well. So being able to go into the research and go, oh, that's what happened, and use those as the tidbits to kind of get me excited and fuel the writing. That's a very pleasurable and happy place for me to be.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of felt like you had quite a lot of fun in the Mother Fault in creating the construct that Mim was living in. I mean, even the name, the department, and then sort of...
Yeah. Oh, that was fun.
Yeah, it sort of felt really freeing, but I guess then with all that freedom comes a big responsibility to keep it in that realistic place as opposed to going out the window. So I can see that there's double-edged sword.
Yeah. I think you're always just asking yourself, will the reader go with me on this? Like, do they still trust me that I have this? And I think, I'm just so blown away by writers who write near future, all the time, because it's, and fantasy, like that kind of enormous world building is just next level kind of impressive.
Yeah, exhausting, I think.
Yeah.
Now I've got a question here from Anna. Who says, there's a real sense of the young adult in the novel, and you mentioned this earlier. Do you think that everybody has that teen years lover that they wonder about later in life? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, no, Anna, I do think that. Like, I'm a hoarder. So when we moved into this studio here, I had all my stuff from mum and dad's place, and in it I've got my little packet of letters from boys that I never threw out. And let me be very clear on this, that the character of Nick is not based on anyone in my life, but I think that it's the memory of a teen lover. Maybe, yes, but it's also the memory of who you were as a teen that is what we are so deeply nostalgic for. And I think that that's what it brings up, the memory of, the possibility and the future, and having the whole world at our fingertips, and more about who we were as a person than necessarily the person that you might have adored or who might have adored you. Gorgeous question though, Anna. Thank you.
Yeah, the ghost of the previous versions of you, I guess they pop up at unexpected moments, which is an interesting thing to navigate. And then there's a question from Carmel. How did you arrive at the politics of your novel?
Great question, Carmel. I stole the politics from everywhere. It's really funny because I keep on thinking, when I was in year 7, I can't believe I'm admitting this to everyone, but I was shortlisted for an award that John Marsden wrote based on the Tomorrow When the War Began books. And in the commentary, he wrote something about the fact that Kate Mildenhall writes like a 40-year-old writer, which I'm sure he thought was lovely, but I got endless ribbing for it. But also that I wrote this really political kind of story. And, I think that like lots of people, I'm fascinated by politics, about how they work. I'm fascinated by power, and the way that power is abused. And I pulled the politics from lots of different places, and honestly, from the kind of bureaucratic speak that we hear from our own governments in this country all the time. And someone asked me the other day, about my personal opinions on the kind of slippery slope from where we are to the kind of world that the Mother Fault's in. And I think it is a slippery slope, and it's one that we can fall down really, really quickly, as you can see in places like the US in particular. But for specific examples, I looked at China and the Uyghur people in terms of surveillance. I drew them from lots of different places to try and get the specifics of this dangerous and kind of frightening new world.
Amazing. Well, I think we're almost at time. So I guess I just wanted to hold up the book again, even though you've got your amazing backdrop there anyway. The book blew me away, and it was so nice for me because I really didn't know what to expect. So thank you for writing it. I think it's so different. It's so interesting. It's so topical, but it's also just an amazing story. So it's a really amazing book. So I'm going to tell everyone I know to buy it and read it.
Oh,
And
thank you, Sarah.
You too, Kate, for all the work you do supporting writers with your podcast, because I think it's a real, really lovely thing to come out every week and to hear everyone's different stories about the writing process. So that's been a really lovely kind of addition to the writing world too.
Thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for stepping in and doing this conversation from lockdown at the end of a day of like 25 Zoom meetings. I know that it's a beautiful thing to have these conversations, and I know it takes a lot for the person who does the reading and the thinking. So thank you so much.
Oh, no, like I said, it was easily my most exciting meeting of the day. So my pleasure, absolutely my pleasure.
Well, that was, as I thought, absolutely fantastic. I can't imagine you could have a more exciting meetings, really. Very lucky if you did. And I really reflect on the fact that it is fantastic having two writers talking, because you're talking from the inside of knowing how things are put together or how you put them together, and talking about how somebody else might be putting together. And in a way, you know the right questions to ask. But also, Sarah, I think you teased out such a lot. I mean, that first question on the app and surveillance, whoa, let's go there now. So that's fantastic. And I mean, I was seeing something in the paper just before we started to talk about control and how the government currently, people aren't allowed. Anne Summers has written something on how she's not really Australian because she can't come home. So who are we and what can we do? And I think you explore some of that, and you don't really give it an ending. You don't tell us what's going to happen. I'm not saying it's open-ended, but there's some resolutions, but the world is not resolved. That world, everything is still hanging. And I think that's a fantastic achievement, because it keeps the reader thinking, oh, I wonder what will happen then. I wonder what will happen next. So the cat.
The kitten arrived. We were waiting for the cameo.
Well, so look, it's been fantastic. And I have to say, my mind is thinking a slaughterhouse, Marlon Brando and Catherine the Great. Okay, so I can put Slaughterhouse and Marlon Brando, Catherine the Great. Is it a
it's actually the gorgeous picture of it's Elle Fanning, isn't it, who has starred recently in The Great on Netflix. And so it's not historically Catherine the Great, but just she's such a fabulous character. I just loved that series so much. If anyone's looking for a pandemic viewing, The Great is amazing.
Okay, well, because I was thinking, okay, well, do we have historical time slip here?
No, not historical time slip.
Okay.
1930s slaughterhouse.
To hear that you're going to be doing it, you're going, well, perhaps not back to the previous genre, but be like Heather Rose, every book is completely different.
Well, and when a story presents itself, I really subscribe to that kind of Elizabeth Gilbert idea that you just have to pounce on it, and then the material shows you how it wants to be written. And, if it's going to take me back to historical fiction, I shall go with it. Well, we look forward to whatever you do next, and also to whatever Sarah does next. So I think that this has kind of raised the tension about who is going to get those books, who is going to win the copies. Oh, yes. Simon and Schuster have so kindly given us. So yes, watch for your emails tomorrow, guys. You'll see if it's going to be you. Look, we'll say goodbye now. Thank you so much, both to Sarah and to Kate. And I look forward to speaking to both of you again at different times and to your next books. Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for coming along. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks,
Thank you, Sisters in Crime. Thank you, everyone, for coming.